And with this, we are now ready for our first panel, Building Future-Proof Global Value Chains. All right, let me introduce immediately our panelists here for the first round table. And we have connected from remotely Taro Shimada, who's Corporate Senior Vice President and Chief Digital Officer at Toshiba Corporation. Here in Chernobyl, we welcome Zeynep Bodur Okyay, who's President and CEO of Kale Group. So please join me on the stage. It's a pleasure having you here. And then we have also connected, as you can see here, from remote, also Luisa Santos, Deputy Director General at BusinessEurope, Leonel, who's Advanced Manufacturing and Digital Transformation Expert at Method FX. We have here Ferdinando Alberti, who's professor at Luke. He's group leader of one of the task force that we mentioned before. And again, here we have Erwin Rauch, assistant professor at the Free University of Bolzano. And he also coordinated one of the task force group, together with Felipe Luchaga, who's CEO of Lemaco, director of IP Computer, and he's a teacher at the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Chile. And again, he's from the task force groups. So I want this to be, and we want this to be, an interactive event. So jump into the conversation. There's a very simple way to ask questions and give your feedback. It's a number that you can use for WhatsApp and SMS if you wish. And the number is, we can show it with a graph. The number is +39 335 7085 439. So the gallery will show it in a minute. It's +39 335 7085 439. So here we are. Take a pic and remember this, because it will be useful to interact with the panelists during your conversation. So let me start with the guests here in Chernobyl, Zeynep Bodur Okyay. Kale Group is one of the leading power in ceramics production, but also in chemical for construction. You are one of the European leaders based in Turkey. What's your reaction when we talk about supply chains and the new way of approaching supply chains that once was limited to some specialists inside companies and today has become so central and important? What's your sense in this?
Thank you first of all.
Okay. They should open this. I think it will work.
So thank you for inviting me and presidents and distinguished guests. Actually, there was a big COVID-19, first of all, forced a dramatic transformation of supply chain management and changes on several fronts. For us in manufacturing, of obviously supply and demand side, digitizing the nature of the supply chains and leadership in addressing the crisis. And those were all subjects that we had to deal. And before, we were used to live in a world with 70% of international trade was involving global value chains. So, but after obviously 2019, international trade growth dropped 3.4% percentage point compared to 2017, and caused new trade barriers and increasing costs and expensive tariffs, etc. So all this brought us to 2020, which was the worst year that we ever lived. Of course, for manufacturing it's very difficult because we are working in plants and we were trained in lean manufacturing and all these issues that we spend many times time and money. Of course, those were all gone during COVID-19, and we had to redesign, the plants. And of course, there were a lot of problems among people who can work from hybrid and in the offices, and the ones that had to come to the work. So we had to deal with component shortages and surging prices and in critical raw materials. And of course, this all led to squeezing margins and increasing consumer prices. Of course, supply chain management used to we used to know as improving the performance of a company, but now it's totally different, as we understood during the crisis. Is now central to optimizing a company's overall valuation and success. So we had to redesign the whole supply chain process and increased operational sustainability into a more resilient, to become a more resilient business. But sometimes this is not easy. I'm working also in aerospace, and we are manufacturer to big multinationals, and due to the travel bans and drop in the aerospace business, mainly in aircraft manufacturing, we had to deal with many uncertainty, and without knowing what will be materials can come in as we used to be just in time, etc. There were all problems that we faced. But now it's apparent for all companies to increase their visibility into their suppliers. So tier 2, tier 1, or tier 3 suppliers has to connect more, and I think work more on ecosystems. Before we were more working on a mindset of ecosystems, thinking more financial results and profits, etc. But now we have to deal with the problem of, taking into account socioeconomic changes, and mostly, as other commentators said, dealing with the employee problems, because keeping talents and working in a different job setting is not easy. So in my opinion, about the structure of global value chains, they are mostly designed to promote mass financial value, but I think value creation is very important, and not just financial, but social, environmental, and intellectual value creation has to be centered, and then how we design supply chains has to do with that. In the journey to this goal, the values and vision of enterprises also vastly matter. I'm a family business, and I feel that family business tend to be more value-led, based on their founding principles, because they work, their upbringing is like that, and family business have long-term investment goals. They can embrace better environmental, social, and governance issues, and can increase their impact also across sectors and geographies. So their most important strength is trust. So we saw that during the crisis, in every part of the life, we faced a trust problem. So I think trust is essential for the family businesses due to their legacy. Because also these shown by survey results that family businesses are really trusted more, and they take care about their communities wherever they are operating, and they take care more relationship, give importance to the relationships. So I think this is important also for a resilient, more reliable supply chain. So I think if family businesses can get together and can create a better impact, and then they will have a startling effect on the future also of the problem.
All right, Zeynep, Bodur, Okyay, thank you so much. Grazie. She's fluent in Italian, but today we have to speak in English. And we heard very interesting stuff, from the ecosystem to the ecosystem, as we heard from Lucilla Scioli, from supply chain to supply network. So there's a real interesting transition underway. Taro Shimada, where do you focus when you look at the future of supply chain in order to strengthen resiliency of manufacturing?
Right. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak in this wonderful conference. So I'm responsible Chief Digital Officer of the Toshiba. And as I actually responsible for the digital, I think the digital technology will be the key to more resilient supply chains and so forth. So first of all, that we need to build somehow the mechanism to share the information more. So if you know about how much resources you needed, in advance, and then also more precise, all those information get shared, then we can avoid that, some of the situation that we are facing today. For example, that not getting enough materials and parts and so forth. But in order to do this, we have several challenges. One challenge is maybe that usually, just like some other people says, that it's not the supply chain, but supply network, meaning that it's not just one supply OEM and then the supply chain have to share the data, but also that all those data need to be shared among them. In that cases, some of the cases, maybe the competitor. So in order to do this, we need to have a standardized methodology to be able to get the data and share. And then also that the important thing is the acceptance of the people to sharing the data, which is difficult thing to do. It's more of the some people's fear about the if you share the information to others and somebody will take advantage and so forth. But if you look at the data, really some of the data is not really usable for other people, but because of some just they don't want to share. But this needs to be changed. And in order to do this, we need to probably have some kind of an incentive model so that you can see the value when you share the data, you can actually get the value back too.
Yeah, sounds great. So data at the center of the future of more resilient manufacturing network supply chain or network supply of ecosystems. But let me move to Luisa Santos as Director General of Business Europe. You've been discussing this also the B20. In a few days there will be a G20 here in Italy that will discuss the future of the global economy. And how do you see the future of manufacturing, and also given we hope it will be short term, but also the shortage economy that we are starting to live into due to all the problems connected with logistics and to mismatch between global demand and global offer?
Well, good afternoon to everyone. And I listened carefully to what Zeynep already said, because she identified a number of the problems that most companies in Europe are facing at the moment. We have just run a questionnaire among the members to identify precisely what are the current challenges that companies are facing in terms of global supply chains, and also what could be the measures to mitigate these challenges. And it's clear that we have short-term or temporary problems, and they relate still to the impact of COVID-19, problems related to shipments, lack of containers, the fact that traveling is still not allowed. We have a lot of problems of mobility of workers, for instance, for China and from China, just to give an example. Of course, we have shortages of raw materials, we have increase in prices. So all these are problems that we are facing now, currently. They are very serious, and they are having an impact also on the access of companies to certain inputs that are needed for their production. Just to mention semiconductors, that impacts a number of sectors. But as I said, the real issue is to look beyond what is temporary and try to define what is here to stay. And among the problems that we see as probably something that will be here to stay, because we have seen them already in the past, they are not something that appeared only during the COVID-19, but they have in a way been accentuated by COVID-19. We see problems, and the previous speaker talked about data. We see problems of data localization, the difficulties to access data and to prevent data from flowing. This is very important today, not just for the services sector, but also for the manufacturing sector. A very strong role of the state in the economy. I mean, this is not necessarily bad. We know that we will need a lot of financial stimulus from the governments around the world to help also rebuild the economy and to help companies getting out of the COVID-19 crisis. But the problem is the state is not a company. The state is very good at managing public policy objectives, but not necessarily a running business. So it's very critical that this strong role of the state in the economy does not lead to too much intervention that sometimes is leading to protectionism and unilateralism. The other important element that I would like to state, because it is something that we think will stay, is the lack of harmonized international standards. This is very important because if we want to create interoperability and if we want to create really global solutions to global challenges and we want to promote global value chains, we need to have harmonized standards. And this is one of the key barriers that companies are facing today. And the last point that I would mention to start is the securitization of trade. And what do I mean about this? We talk a lot today about economic security. So it's the state taking a very broad approach of what is national security and what is defense. And is going beyond traditional sectors. So we're also seeing more and more of export restrictions when it comes to dual-use items. And the definition, what it is a dual-use item, mean an item that can be used for defense, but also for civil purpose, is increasing a lot because of the digital area where we see a lot of intangible services and goods that could be indeed used in the two spheres. So this is something that is creating some challenges to our companies, and definitely we will need to look a bit more into policies that could mitigate some of these issues, like promoting increased cooperation, increase the transparency and the better planning along the supply chains, and of course, building resilience. And for us, building resilience is not only attracting more investments to Europe or creating more investments closer to Europe, is also diversification. We cannot be absent from Asia. We cannot be absent from Latin America. The important aspect is to have several sources of supply and several sources of demand. So this is important. And final point on sustainability. We know there is an increased request on companies in this area. And there's also an increased request that companies sometimes replace states and are the ones making sure that along the supply chains, everyone is respecting social and environmental standards. This is something companies are willing to do. But of course, the companies cannot implement European rules in third countries. That is something I think we should not ask companies to do. So there are limits also to what companies can do in this area in terms of creating more sustainable supply chains.
Well,
thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Luisa Santos, also for putting this into perspective and for mentioning policies. We'll discuss more deeply also in other panels about the relation between policies, not just fiscal policy, but also industrial policies, looking ahead to make more resilient manufacturing supply chain and in general industry more resilient in the future. And also for asking the question that everyone is wondering about: how long will it last? What is temporary and what is not? This is what also central banks are desperately trying to understand, because also monetary policy, have been crucial in facing and weathering the storm of COVID from a financial perspective. Now, let me move to a young technologist like Leonel and Leal to understand how are you approaching this, also in terms of creating more agile supply chains. I'm afraid you're on mute. Okay, here we go.
Okay,
Yes.
Hopefully that works better
Yeah.
now. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here. Yeah, I think, being agile, I like how you led right now with talking a little bit about what's permanent and what's temporary. And I think one of the key things that we know is permanent as a matter of fact now is transformation and change. And what I think really is at the forefront of this future transformation is the ability to build digitally native processes. When we think of all our processes, when we think of how our departments work, not just manufacturing, but starting from our people and how we invest in our people, how we streamline things like finance or HR or investment, for example. What are the digital processes that we have that enable us to pivot quickly, to deal with disruptions in our value chain, and create that agile ability to be resilient in the future? I think one of the areas that is really key as we look forward into the future is, do we have, our organizations have that transformational capability as a core competency? You know, a lot of organizations today are building transformation offices where the sole purpose is to start creating and digitizing our workflows. Everything from, you know, when we think of manufacturing, product development, concurrent engineering, the ability to work both manufacturing, marketing, engineering in one space, understand our customer requirements, and simplify our products and our value chain. I think this is critical for us to enable products that we can build. You know, we talked a lot about manufacturing as a service, for example, or ecosystems of manufacturing. And this is key, right? Because it really begins with the ability to understand how product attributes contribute to design attributes, and then manufacturing capability as well. And another thing that I think is important to note is that, you know, a value chain, and I like the analogy of a chain, because a value chain is really only as strong as its weakest link. And consistently, we need to be reinvesting in our people. We need to be reinvesting in foundational problem-solving capability, foundational connectivity capability. Yes, there is a future of AI. There is a future of AR and VR and fully digital supply chains. But if our people are not part of this transformation capability and they're not given the tools to be prepared to execute, we will consistently miss our targets, right? So I think it's important that we develop these programs and these initiatives that really also invest in our people to become more literate in digital technologies and to be enablers of digital technologies as well.
All right, fantastic. Now, Leonel, let me move to Zeynep, Bodur, Okyay again to understand from your perspective and your business experience, how relevant is technology to create more resistant and resilient supply chain? And we just heard about investing in people and also organization. What do you make of that? Yeah, okay.
I would like to start with Luisa, how she put it, because what will remain, what will be temporary. But I think even before COVID, we had hard issues to address, and many of us were paralyzed in front of the problems, but we all refrained from taking steps further. So COVID was an awakening for us in terms of business continuity and all the issues that we were facing. So obviously during COVID, we all had to react instinctively, making decisions even with the limited data, because we had to respond immediately. So now we will see when we will return to a new normal, we will be able to see the results of those changes, you know, that we made, and even whether they are credible and dependable in the long run. But most probably, some of them has to be changed, but most of them has to stay. So I don't think that it will stay, you know, because it's a new way of our life as manufacturers. So I also believe that disruption and value creation are very well linked. So this was the example that I gave now. And so therefore, when, for example, supply chains we are managing are disrupted, we saw that that there are many issues that we have to solve, starting from our own people, you know, upskilling, reskilling issues, but also we had to find new channels to reach our customers and to understand them better. So this is when the digitalization and you know, data goes into the picture. So therefore, we need to create a holistic enterprise value value, this is crucial, and this is crucial also for the resilience that everybody is talking. So therefore, we need to understand the current value change challenge. We have to position ourselves to invest in long-term growth and build resilient systems. And another point that I like to highlight is, of course, this digitalization is not one-off thing. You know, we have to work, but we have to be careful also. No one is left behind. You know, this means SMEs. This means gender issues, which we were tackled during B20, and also this means countries. You know, because I see that in Europe, even regulations are coming after, and there's very difficulty to understand each other, among countries. The priorities are different. So also in the world, there are many countries that are, developing, and they need to address, the Green Deal, which is another set of pressure on the companies, and digitalization investments. So I think it has to be more inclusive. So inclusiveness, I believe, resilience and inclusiveness are two most important issues that business communities and the policymakers has to take into account. And understanding relationships and processes and ensuring more visibility and traceability, that was also mentioned before, are really important. And I was part of this, the World Economic Forum's Advanced Manufacturing and Production Platform, and they said that establishing a framework to allow data exchange across industries and businesses will create a process optimization, which is estimated at over $100 billion. So this is a huge amount which we have to tackle. So more coordination, more learning from each other is really crucial. Otherwise, we saw during the COVID, for example, one part of the world is stopping, the other one is working. So if there is no alignment, there's no business at all. So I think everything has to be more inclusive.
Absolutely. So inclusiveness is a dimension we're going to discuss again in these panels, and also diversity of the supply chain, as we heard from Professor Taish this afternoon. And you already told us that it's not anymore about optimizing performance. It's an existential dimension, managing the supply chain, meaning that in the organization, it's not just about a production level. You've got to rethink all the organization based on this. So, Taro, Shimada, what do you make of this when you think of supply chain and the central idea of a new organization for the manufacturing of tomorrow? I'm afraid you're on mute.
Oh, really?
Okay, here we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Really good. So some of the things that the people talk about, I was hearing, we wanted to invest more digital technology and then digital native and so forth. From my perspective, that some of the things that we can make digitalized, which is happening already, but we have harder problems. Some of the things that is very difficult to make it digital. Of course, some of the people still not really that fully engaged with the digital technology, I understand. But those are the people who has some difficulty how you can actually incorporate into the digital technology itself. So the concept of the cyber physical system, which is not just digital, but also that the physical product tied together, and then reflecting that all those things happening in the real world is reflected in the cyberspace, will create a much more easier step towards the much more resilient, and then also that a much more transparent system for the manufacturing and value chains and supply chain network.
Now, Leonel, Leal, I know that you have an experience in trying to approach the supply chain restructuring with this angle. So all the functional areas inside the organization has to be rethought and reorganized in order to have more resilient supply chain. How about this? What's your experience?
Yes, absolutely. I think the key here, and I think you just nailed it, right, is being cross-functional, cross-departmental. And a key capability and a key need here is to create a transformation roadmap across your departments and across the work streams that you want to drive impact. I think it's key that as we outline that roadmap, that across our organizations, we understand, how success looks like, creating metrics for each level of what does the future of, product development look like when we have these digital tools? What does the future of supply chain resilience look like? So that everyone understands not just what we want to get to and where we want to go, but how we're going to get there. And I think, really, in my experience, it's been very critical that we outline this roadmap in a way that we have a metric-driven approach. So we start with connectivity, we start with digital tools, we start with the ability to build problem solving and core capabilities in our organization, and then we drive into automation and digital technologies that are going to give us the future that we're looking for, so that we're not just playing with toys and technology, for example, but we're actually driving to a future that we know we're measuring ourselves to.
All right, that's great. So just keep an eye on the sun rising. I don't know how you will look like in a few minutes because the image is changing due to what's happening. Now, Luisa, Santos, we heard about many challenges for the industrial sector. But in the end, also its resilience is driving the recovery of the economy. So how can we imagine to turn these challenges into opportunities looking at the future?
Well, that's a very good question. I think coming back to the challenges, of course, the digitalization of the economy is on one end a challenge, and I think there is one aspect that was not mentioned that we are also experiencing. Is of course the digitalization is offering new opportunities, but is also creating sensitivities because we are very much vulnerable to cybersecurity and cyber attacks, for instance. So we need, as we go along and we develop these new possibilities and these new opportunities, we also need to address the challenges, and this is one of them. We will definitely mean that more people will be involved in supply chains. I think the digitalization offers new opportunities, especially for SMEs. This is something we have seen as well during the COVID crisis. A lot of SMEs in sometimes markets that are smaller, for instance in Africa, are able, through digitalization, to be more integrated in global value chains. So this is one positive aspect. But of course, also talking about sustainability and the necessary green transformation, I think this is the other big challenge that our companies are facing today. There are also a lot of opportunities. Of course, companies will be developing new technologies, will be developing new products, new services. But the question is, until we get there, it's important that we have a good legal environment, a good competitive environment. And this is also one of the reasons why we say when we are talking in Europe about the Green Deal, the European industry is very much backing this Green Deal. But the question is, how are we going to do it? How are we going to achieve the objectives? Because it is important that in the process we keep our competitiveness and we really arrive to the stage where from a challenge it becomes an opportunity. And this is very important. It also means we need to have the financial means to do it, and the question of sustainable finance is also very key. It will be very important that to allow for this transformation and these new opportunities to become a reality, that we have the investments available and the money that will be needed in huge quantities, both public and private.
All right, I think we discussed some very major topics across the board, but before opening also the floor to the coordinators of the working group of Back to the Future of WMF, I remind you that there's still some space for your questions, so if you want to use the number that the gallery can also show again, it will be a pleasure to use also your questions. So let me go to Felipe Lechuga, who's connected remotely, and he worked in the group that was investigating the importance of manufacturing SMEs in developing economies. And so we already heard that there's a risk that the digital transition, sustainable transition, that needs huge investments can leave someone behind. And if we lose the richness and diversity of SMEs, we lose innovation, we lose employment, we lose wealth. So how about, and what are the main evidence of your work?
Well, hello, and thank you for the invitation. Well, as you just said, SMEs are a very important part of the economy, ecosystem of the world. About 90 or 95% of all enterprises in the world are SMEs, and they produce more than 70% of products and services and produce over or around 60% of the private sector employment. So it's key and very important to focus some policies and actions and recommendations into helping these kind of companies in the world, and specifically in developing countries, because there are some specific key factors that affect these kind of companies in developing countries. Manufacturing SMEs normally have their own struggles, there's some problems that are derived from their size, for instance, lack of finance or problems with human resources or technological capabilities. We're talking about artificial intelligence and other technologies here, but sometimes SMEs, especially in developing countries, don't even have access to an ERP system or basic technologies such as email or internet connection. So it's very important to help those companies in these kind of aspects. Also, the eruption of the fourth industrial revolution has forced companies of all sizes and sectors to embrace drastic inner and outer changes, and that's been impacting especially smaller companies. And of course, there are the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemics, which are, of course, catastrophic, but also are helping some smaller companies to get more familiar with information technologies, and that could be something good to take from all this. Especially in developing countries, there are problems such as lack of harmonized certification and regulatory environment standards that reduce the market power for companies for exports. So that's something to look into also. But there are also some very important opportunities for these kind of companies. For instance, take the advantage of the continuous rising on of information and communication technologies. That's something that companies can take advantage of and help them make a huge shift in the economy. So we prepared a set of recommendations for these companies, which are very simple and basic ones, and are very aligned with what the other speakers are saying. First, the most important thing is to have a clear roadmap for the industrial policy for the next period of, 5 to 10 years. Because this is crucial because it gives a framework for the companies to clarify the direction that they're heading. So it allows everybody to plan ahead and achieve better results in the future. Also, very important is to diversify core competencies among SMEs. So determination of market niches is essential for an SME, so they can sustain their local competition and increase the economy or the country's efficiencies in the global market. So a little bit about what we were talking before of manufacturing as a service, right? Creating a flexible and distributed manufacturing by using the special competencies among these different SMEs in an economy. Of course, reducing the information asymmetry is something that it's very important. And that's a great challenge, especially for developing countries. We identified here a difference between what we could call a producer and a manufacturer in a developing country, where producers are just manufacturing things for a larger company somewhere else, but manufacturers own their technology, own their processes, and they can make some research and development that brings more value. Also, human resource specialization, it's very important to have technological qualifications comparable to developed countries. And then there's the challenge of sustainability and shared economy, right? So we have to try to shift from natural resources to sustainable sources because this is a global trend and it's a requirement. So this is the only way to guarantee the future of the companies. And finally, digitalization and innovation are crucial for SMEs.
Well, thank you for this, Felipe Lechuga. And I remind everyone that on the digital platform of the WMF, you will find all the conclusion and recommendation of all the working groups. But with this, I move also to Professor Fernando Alberti, who was driving the group about trend-driven innovation. And you wrote a white paper on trend-driven innovation. What the main trends are that can help building a more sustainable resistance also and resilience supply chain in manufacturing?
So first of all, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure. Let me start like that. So when I proposed to my colleagues of the scientific committee of the World Manufacturing Foundation to have a session on trend-driven innovation, I had in mind a very famous column by Forbes, where you have the first column, which is 1917, and you have the industrialist era, so there was U.S. Steel as the biggest company there, and then 50 years later, 1967, we had IBM, so it was the machine, the hardware era, and then 2017, the platform era. So we were asking ourselves, what is going to happen in the fourth column, no? If we had the fourth column there. So we started with the idea that typically in firms, we are not talking so much about trends. No? There is a very famous comic strip that says that managers do not talk about trends, they do not listen to trends, they don't see trends. No? There was a kind of that comic strip, which inspires to, first of all, put a focus on trends and try to clarify that trends are something that you might find in the present as a sort of accelerating pattern that you might see in present. So with this in mind, we started collecting trends, and we come up with a list of 60 trends that we submitted to our panelists. And then we run a first session where we try to pick up those trends were the most important one and trying to prioritize those trends. And we come up with a list of 10 trends, which are super consistent with the things that we already listened to so far. So the very first one was the fact that we need to go carbon negative. So it's not just a matter of being, green or sustainable or circular economy oriented, but to be carbon negative. This is something that goes hand in hand with being having a business model which is more purpose driven. So finding the right purpose in your firm. With the issue of inclusiveness and diversity that Professor Taish talked about before. On a different side, we consider also the data part, so that was another important thing, not just because of data-driven organization, but also we talk about another trend, which is the so-called phygital ecosystem, no? So the fact that you are connected not just digitally and physically with the plurality of many different stakeholders. And to this regard, of course, industrial artificial intelligence and machine learning is very much important. As a consequence to that, we have to rethink the way we are conceiving our workers. So we talk about a trend that we call the human X, which is, the kind of combination between humans and robots. So all that part of co-roboting that is kind of supporting humans with superpowers, especially on manufacturing plants. We've been talking about a consequence which is traceability, and not just traceability, but also the importance of cybersecurity on data, especially the behavioral cybersecurity on data. And finally, we come up with the understanding that we're going towards a world where data will help manufacturing firms to be more likely to deliver a very hyper-personalized product, no, to the market. So that was the list of the 10 trends that we come up with our panelists.
That was fascinating, and it takes to be a little bit visionary when it comes also to trends that will affect the future. AI is not a vision, AI is a reality. Erwin Rao, you've been working in the group, in the focus group that worked exactly on the contribution of AI to make more resilient supply chain for the future of manufacturing. What are exactly the opportunities that AI opens in this direction, and what are the critical steps that companies has to take to move in that direction?
Yes, in our focus group, we were working especially also in the first step on the challenges. Therefore, what kind of strategy we want to follow when we are defining then also, or when we are proposing then also the key recommendations. And two strategies that we have looked at, one is the back bounce, therefore how to go back to the original state of manufacturing systems before the pandemic situation, which is more related to increased robustness of manufacturing systems, which in our opinion was maybe a little bit old style, and we wanted to go towards something more modern, and therefore to go towards a strategy that is much more on bounce forward, therefore increasing also the agility of manufacturing systems, and therefore to propose also and to develop also key recommendations that are much more focusing also on recommendations how we can really change also the world of manufacturing. And with this, we started and also then to work on what are the main key recommendations. And here we developed a complete list of 19 key recommendations in 6 dimensions. So one dimension is the one of product design. The other one was the one on maintenance, as well as also on manufacturing, on different topics also like ethics, as well as also how to deal also with the cybersecurity part. And there we saw also exactly what you meant before with where are the critical aspects, that the most critical aspects that we have seen are not so much on the technical aspects, because we already have a lot of technical solutions for AI systems, but very often we have also the difficulty how to deal with this in our manufacturing shop floor or in our department where we are then applying then this kind of technologies. So we talked also a lot about the ethics part there. And here we already heard also before that Europe is in the forefront, defining then also in 2019 these guidelines for trustworthy AI and how we can go towards a more lawful, towards more robust and towards more ethical AI in our manufacturing systems. We have also seen that in the United States, and National Institute for Standards and Technology is working on a similar guidelines for AI user trust. And in basically what we have seen also as a big issue for the future, also for policymakers, is that there's a lack of global standards. Therefore, we need also to develop global standards in order that the AI developer, as well as also the AI adopter then in the manufacturing systems, they know also how to implement them and how to design them.
Mm-hmm. All right, excellent. So again, all the conclusions and recommendation of the focus group will be on the digital platform, so you can get all the information of this huge work that all these gentlemen and ladies have done in the recent months to get here to the World Manufacturing Forum. We've got time just for a final round up of takeaways from our speakers of the round table, and I will get back to Luisa Santos, especially with a question that I just got from the audience. And again, it's your turn if you do have a question. And the question is this: the shock of COVID-19 has prompted governments to want to shorten value chains and make their economy more self-autonomous and self-reliant and autonomous. What does that mean for the future of manufacturing?
Well, there's not a clear view of common understanding what it is to be more resilient and self-sufficient. I think that from the business side, this needs always to be a company decision. So we understand that governments will want to avoid the shocks that we had. Of course, this is not going to be completely possible because we have limits to what can be avoided or what can be mitigated when you have such a spike in demand that is not met by supply. The question is, can we work together with governments to avoid or to mitigate future shocks in some areas? And this is something that we are discussing right now. So for us, the strategy needs to be quite ambitious in terms of using different tools. Of course, we need sometimes to build more investments in Europe or closer to Europe. To invest in areas where we are not been investing. But the important thing is that this needs to be economically viable. So we should not be building overcapacity in areas where we know we are not competitive. So this is point number one. And we should actually use the resources to invest in areas that are areas of the future and areas where we have a competitive advantage in Europe. And I think this is very important because we have lack of resources, so it's important that we put our resources in the areas that are really driving in the future. I think this is key. And then we need a strategy of diversification. Of course, we need to look for new markets. We need to look for new sources of supply in raw materials, including, for instance. And we need to use also new technologies and build more circularity in our business models. I think these are some of the areas where we need to work. But above all, and I insist on this because I think it's very important, we need a conducive regulatory framework in Europe. And we need to work with global partners to address global challenges like climate change or cybersecurity, because if we don't do that, we are basically creating an unlevel playing field, and that's not very good for our companies.
All right. And Taro, Shimada, and Zeynep, Bodur, Okyay, I would like to get your takeaway starting from another question from the audience. And the question is, what do you think will be the future of work and, for example, industrial smart working? What do you see this in the post-pandemic scenario? Let me start with Taro Shimada.
Yeah, I think it is important that we're going to get in much more hybrid type of situations and better, more and more. So the people can work remotely, and we actually returned at our office, 30% of the office to that building company, so that we actually not going back to the before the pandemic, so which is important. So we kind of decided to do the new type of the working, and also that all kinds of different technologies required. But at the same time that you mentioned about what the opportunity we have right now. Maybe you don't know, but in Japan, we have so many natural disasters. Every natural disaster will make our supply chain stronger. And then we slowly building all those platforms to sharing information, which gradually make it better. So it is important to have the kind of second sources and so forth. But in some cases, that there is the economic reason that we need to keep it open. So one other request from the Japan to Europe is I hope that Europe will keep it open so that our global economy will grow together.
Well, that was a great point. I understand that Japan suffered from these disasters on a period, but we lived globally a humanitarian catastrophe, and we hope that one of the outcomes will be that our supply chain and our networks of defense will be stronger in the future. What's your view at Kale Group?
Yeah, first of all, these frontier technologies are not anymore defined as enabler, but are prerequisites. So I agree that we must also be mindful of the fact that creating value from these solutions is not only a matter of introducing those technologies as a one-off exercise, but we should invest more and more on people, because without people, everything else is empty, you know. You can have buildings, you can have capitals, but, you know, without people, adequate people, it's difficult. So we are also suffering a lot from finding right talents, and hiring process is totally different right now. So most probably we are going to live in a hybrid world. So getting the most of digital technologies is only possible if matched by major investment in people's reskilling, upskilling. So this, and I believe that major change will be in HR policies and HR management in the companies, because we have to replace the education system as well, because we have to reinvest in people in a shorter time. So I think everything in that respect has to change. And of course, end-to-end coordination, employee social cohesion, and job mobility is very critical. And because also we saw that if there weren't such responses to the crisis, the companies would have difficulty in succeeding managing the supply chain. So those issues also, end-to-end coordinations and social cohesion is important. So we have, I also mentioned before, the value chain, re-evaluation of value chain. So working in a network, working together is very important. Therefore, I think all these things are going to be in our agenda more often than before, and I think if we overcome those obstacles, I think the digitalization, the green economy, and everything related will be much easier solvable. Otherwise, you know, the mismatch will create other disruptions. Maybe this time not COVID, but other problems.
Absolutely, I understand how having the right people is at the center of resilience of not just supply chain, but in general manufacturing. So, Leonel, Leal, my last question to you is, and it came also from the audience, industrial workers are aging. How can manufacturing companies attract a younger generation, and how can it make more attractive manufacturing for the new generations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a couple things, right? One of them is focusing on your workplace so that you are digitally native. And what that means is you're looking at the tools that the generations today are using, both to connect, to collaborate. I mean, there's a lot of great collaboration tools, and making a digital workplace. I know that connects a little bit to this discussion about hybrid work and remote work, but I think it's important that when you look at how your teams collaborate and how they work, that these tools are digitally native. This allows more of the younger generation to get up to speed. There is a lot of interest in the younger generation in product development and manufacturing and industrialization. But what we need to do is bring the tools of digitization into our space and not be afraid to experiment there. I think too often we do focus on the fact that we continue to do things and use the tools of the past. And this is also detrimental to us attracting talent. I mean, one thing we didn't touch on, but it connects a little bit to the point just made of the question of the audience, is there's a tremendous war on talent. And being able to attract talent in the next 10 to 15 years is going to be critical to any organization that wants to embark on transformation.
This, to me, is one of the biggest challenges in general. Still waiting for a 4.0 influencer or a TikTok phenomenon on that side, able to attract more youngsters to the industry. So thanks again to Taro Shimada, Zeynep Bodur, Okyay, Luisa Santos, and Leonel Leal, the panelists of our first session, together with Professor Fernando Alberti, Felipe Risciuga, and Erwin Rauch. Thanks. A round of applause to our panelists. Thank you very much.